So this is the first thing that I film. My movie isn't off to that great of a start. Oh well, Mr. Needles promises me gore, to give me shots that will terrify even the smallest of souls. And I believe him. After all, if you can't trust a mass-murdering psychotic black magician, what's the world coming to?
Yeah, that's the one we took. The one right after, or right before the way station. Yeah. The freeway for a bit, and then you turn off. Well, we're on that road right now, but we're the fuck out in the middle of nowhere. And I don't...
Apparently, we're lost. So Mr. Needles wants us to believe. That is Stickman, who seems a little too at ease that we are lost. Or maybe it's because he is lost with the company of Mr. Needles and a jewel thief turned amateur filmmaker. The company you keep reflects your desires, they say. I don't know much about Stick, and I know less of his motivation for helping me in my lurid quest for film. Whatever his reasons, I'll set them aside. After all, he is funding this little project of mine. After hours of endless driving, we come across our first prospect. Man, that's a creepy looking house. I should be a little more frightened than I am, but I'm too excited to see what Mr. Needles can do with his powers. I've heard stories and seen him kill a whole flock of pigeons with a brief gesture of his index finger. But nothing that I need for my film. My film that will give horror a new name, give blood a new taste, and maybe, just maybe, oh, here we are. Upon our arrival, I'm slightly disturbed by the power of this house to draw 3 people like us to it, and silence us for a few minutes. There is something wrong with this house, I can feel it. Mr. Needles senses something too. He tells us that this house holds the potential to provide him with the necessary means to make a photogenic art of horror. Stick, on the other hand, seems to disagree with Mr. Needles. He tells him that this house isn't right for the film we came here to make. Mr. Needles, undiverted by Stickman's opinion, proceeds to approach the house and says to follow if we want to see what he can do. After a brief acknowledgement, Stick follows Mr. Needles. Looks like I'm next. Entering the house, I see no sight of Mr. Needles or Stickman. Then, only seconds later, I get this unnerving feeling that I'm walking on my own grave. I can't breathe. I can't be in this house. Shortly after, Mr. Needles comes out of the house. Come with me, he says, before Stickman sees us. Quick, this way, there's things you need to know. He tells me that he is going to kill Stickman. He assures me that the slaughter of Stick will be one of his greatest works of art, that his flesh opera will provide the footage I need to make my film bleed through the screen. That is what I need for my film. That is what I desire. That is why I've brought you along, Mr. Needles. You get your bloodlust, and I get the best horror movie. But you forget, Stick's funding this. Without his money, we can only proceed so far. Mr. Needles assures me that Stick's money won't be a problem. But I also think to myself, that Stick isn't such a bad guy, that I kind of enjoy the company of his weirdness. Do I trust Mr. Needles? Of course. Do I have a choice? Well, I don't really want to see what my own liver looks like. Listen, says Mr. Needles. This is what we do. Stick man, you will be immortalized. You will be remembered. This next place is just what I was expecting, but I act surprised for Stick. His demeanor changes nearly the second we grace the dead grass surrounding this house. It isn't like the last one. I feel nothing here. Mr. Needles says to Stick that we should not go in this place, that he has a bad feeling. Stickman assures him that all is well and we proceed. I follow behind, in anticipation, in silence. Soon Mr. Needles will start his rituals. Soon Stickman will slip out of reality. Soon I will get my shot. Hear what? Never mind, says Stickman. Just never mind. Then comes the moment. Stickman does what Mr. Needles and I already know. He tries to subdue us with a little bit of horse tranquilizer in the wine he brought. We pretend to drink the wine, but Stick, he drinks some to himself. Then he slips away, his intentions twisted and dissolved through cheap drink and drug. His lust for blood teeters on the surface of this once insightful mind. The corpses of those he has killed rot, then vanish before his very eyes. We wait and watch. With Mr. Needles preparing the final ritual of his spell, Stickman joins me outside. Stick tells me that the growling voice he hears coming from this house lusts for blood, that this horrifying entity will not be satisfied unless death is ensued. He tells me about the 27, or was it 28 people he's already killed to serve this abandoned essence that has now become his lifeline. Stick says he needs to kill Mr. Needles to end the voices. Then it will be satisfied, and we will be enriched with the power of Mr. Needles. I've heard this before. Mr. Needles told me Stick would say these things, and told me that if I wanted my movie to be a work of masterful carnage, to tell Stick that you don't understand. Stick disappears into the house, and I check on Mr. Needles. He's almost done, and the time is close. As Stick is occupied, Mr. Needles meets me outside. He tells me that he's ready, that Stick has become part of his spell. I ask if everything is going according to schedule. It is, he says, except one thing. He tells me that I can't have this shot. I say to him I am of course upset by this. It is what I was promised. This is where my film becomes an absolute. Don't worry, says Mr. Needles. You'll get the shot I promised you. You will get your blood and carnage, just not here, and not now. This one is only for me, my blood. When I'm finished with Stickman, we'll go back to the other farmhouse, and there will be the shot you so long for. There will be the beginning and the end of your film. All right, Mr. Needles, set the stage.
There's no such thing as a ghost. no such thing as...
Do I really want to go back in there after what I've felt before? Things seem different now with Stick gone. Is this where my movie finally begins? It seems so dark here now. What is this shot that Mr. Needles has planned for me? It doesn't make much sense. What's in this house? My heart starts beating faster, the blood rushing to my head. Excitement and fear are trying to take over my body, but I fight it. I have to be sound for this shot. I have to be prepared for the horrific pleasure I'm about to capture on film. This will make my movie a complete work of art. No more petty jewel thieving, no more dealing with the likes of Mr. Needles and Stickman, no more mistrust, backstabbing, and lying. After this shot, everything else will come together, and I can start a new life. Hear what? I say to Mr. Needles. In there, he points. My blood racing now. I finally get the shot. Soon. Closer. Closer. How the hell did I not see that coming? There are 3 things that Stickman once told me that he wishes I would never hear. That's the first. That's the second. And that's the third. After that blow to the back of my head, I can barely focus, let alone get up, and with this thing inside me, I can barely grasp a single breath. This voice tells me things. It tells me that it needs blood, that we need blood to live. This damn entity demands bloodshed, but I can't even get myself up off this cold concrete. Louder and louder, more horrific and painful, it lusts for blood. I have no way to quench it. I can't give it blood. I can't get up, and even if I could, Mr. Needles has already sealed the door, making it impossible for me to see daylight. I am forever damned to this hole, with this creature in my mind. The growling is intense now. I can feel myself slipping away. I hear the screams and cries from countless souls given to this growling voice. Then, piercing through these souls, comes a visitor. Stickman gives me truth. He tells me that Mr. Needles gave this to me, that he needed to, and the only way to understand this is to see through his eyes, to see what Mr. Needles did to him. Then I will know what to do. Now, do you understand? Yes, I tell Stick. I do. Turns out that on top of being a mass-murdering sorcerer psychopath, Mr. Needles is also a soul-sucking freak. And what's more powerful than Stick's soul? The soul of a man who's killed nearly 30 people. But along with his soul came a price. The entity. The growling voice. So Mr. Needles gave it to me, and locked me away with it so it couldn't come back to him. But Mr. Needles forgot about one thing. Blood is blood. A dull, rusty nail. That'll do.
There's no such thing as a ghost.
Screw this crap. I got the fuck out of there. After that damn voice left me, I regained my senses and ran like a bat out of hell. 3 days later, a farmer found Mr. Needles standing right there. He never moved. Last I hear, he wound up in a mental institution somewhere in Washington. They say he's never spoke a word, but on some nights, the nurses swear they hear growling sounds coming from his room. As for me, well, I took myself to the nearest hospital, got some stitches and a tetanus shot. I never did make my horror movie. Gave that up. Wasn't really my thing, it turns out. Besides, being a jewel thief has its benefits. No sorcerers, no souls, no crazy voices in my head, no self-sacrifice, just dealing with natural human scum. And making a few bucks on the side. Oh, I almost forgot. As for Stickman, well, he gets around.
Now it's time for witchery. Ready, witches? 1, 2, 3. Double, double, toil and trouble, making witches brew. Round about the pot we go, adding to the stew. A dash of this, a splash of that, and some of these things too. Eye of newt and toe of frog, hole of bat and tongue of dog. And how about a great big gob of slippery, slimy goo? Ew.